Hey everyone, this is Nick from Catskill Customs here in upstate New York, and welcome to the first episode of a video series I'll be doing all about this tool right here, my Sosa Metalworks Shape-O-Matic power hammer. I don't see it, as you can see, it's sharp. Now my plan for this series is to not only show you guys the different functions and capabilities of this machine, but I want to show you how to put it to use on your project. So I'll have some tips and tricks and some overall tutorials on how to use different functions and get the most out of this machine. To start off the series, I want to talk about what I feel is the most beneficial function of a power hammer like this, and that's shrinking. The ability to efficiently and consistently shrink is a game changer when it comes to shaping your panels. And I also feel it leads to a better part in the end. The reason being is when we shrink sheet metal, we're actually making it thicker. By contrast, when we stretch metal, we're making it thinner. So when you're making a panel, especially a deep panel with a lot of shape, if you go about it by mostly just stretching, you can end up with some pretty thin material in the end, and you might have a panel that's more prone to denting or fatigue in the future. If we use a combination of shrinking and stretching to create that panel, we finish up with a product that's overall thicker and more durable in the end. It's a win-win, and it's also a lot faster, as you'll see. So before we jump on the power hammer and start making noise, let's talk a little bit about what actually happens when we shrink on a power hammer using these thumbnail shrinking dies. Because I feel it's important to have an understanding of what's happening. A lot of times we'll just use the term shrink, stretch, but it's more important to know how is this machine actually shrinking the metal and what's going on when we feed the panel in there. So let's take a look at what's actually happening, and I'll break it all down for you guys. So let's take a good look at these dies. These are called thumbnail shrinking dies because apparently someone at some point felt like this looks like a thumbnail. I don't see it, but whatever. Now when this isn't the hammer, this is your lower die and this is your upper die, and the panel is fed in this direction. Now the upper die fits like so. So the thumbnail and the upper groove index together, right? So when we're looking at these dies, they actually have two different functions. The thumbnail and the groove on the upper die is a forming function, and that forms a tuck. When we feed in, it forms a tuck that looks like this right here. Then, as we pull it out, these flat sections, here and here, which come together tightly, then hammer down that tuck. And it looks like this right here, crushed smooth. So that is the basis of how they work. But now, how does that shrink metal? Let me show you, and hopefully this makes sense. So when we feed the panel in, we create a tuck. So in a cross section, that looks something like this, right? If we were to look at this panel from the front, it looks like this. There's your tuck going up. Hope that makes sense. Now, as we feed the panel out in this flat sections, hammer down that tuck, it doesn't fold it, but what ends up happening is it pushes these sides down into themselves, right? So as it comes out and it collapses, these sections squish down together, and you end up with a panel that where that tuck is actually thicker, right? And by squeezing those together and making that thicker, the surface area of the panel is pulled together in that area, and that is your shrink. I hope that makes sense. Again, you have your tuck that's created when you feed the panel in, and then when you pull the panel out, these side sections that are tented up into the tuck get crushed into themselves, thus forming a thicker section and pulling the surface area of that panel together where that tuck is, and that creates your shrink. So if you think of a tuck in a V shape, when it's crushed, it pulls together and creates a thicker section of material. By doing these tucks in a row next to each other, we can make the panel uniform thickness and decrease the surface area wherever we put our tucks. Now it is worth taking a moment to mention that you can shrink metal by hand using a process called tuck shrinking. You create a tuck in the metal using something like a tucking fork or by various ways of hammering the metal, getting those tucks to pop up, and then you methodically crush those tucks down. Sounds familiar, right? It's the same exact mechanism that these dies are using. These dies create a tuck and then hammer that tuck down into itself. So whether you're doing it by hand with hand tools like hammers and tuck forks and a wooden stump, or you do it with these dies, the mechanism that creates the shrink, you know, the size of that tuck and hammered into themselves, is the same mechanism. So I believe that tuck shrinking is an important process to know and get good at, to be able to do it by hand. Some things you can't get into a machine. You might have to do it on a vehicle per se. But can you tuck shrink by hand as efficiently or fast as a power hammer and as consistently? In my opinion, no way. I'm relatively new to power hammers. I've been shaping metal by hand and shrinking metal by hand for almost a decade now, and I am nowhere close to as good as that machine is as far as when it comes to shrinking. I'm just not. There are some people out there who might say they are, and if they are, I mean, awesome, good for them. But personally, I can't get anywhere close to what that machine can do. So that's something to keep in mind. If you don't have a power hammer and you're working on your tuck shrinking, thank you for watching this video this far. And keep that mechanism in mind. If you didn't understand quite how tuck shrinking works, I hope that cleared it up for you a little bit. And keep that in mind when you're hammering out your tucks of what you're looking to do. And I think it'll help you get that process down a little bit better. So now that you hopefully have an idea of how thumbnail shrinking dies work, let's take a look at how we're going to put them to work on our projects. I've got this buck right here that I made a little while back for a motorcycle tank. This represents the left side of a motorcycle tank. And the panel that we're going to be making is right here. So it'll be the front left corner of the tank. The reason why I'm choosing this to demonstrate is this is a big motorcycle tank. And this panel right here is a decent sized panel with a lot of shape. So this could easily be the same as, like, say, a cab corner on a classic pickup or something like that. This is a shape that you'll encounter with motorcycles or cars. So I figure it'd be a good panel to do. Now, I went ahead and I made a quick paper pattern. As you can see, it goes right here. And then I transferred the pattern onto some 18 gauge steel, 18 gauge cold rolled, standard material for this type of thing. Now, I'm not going to go into how I made the pattern and what I put on it. That's not really the scope of this video. But if you'd like to see a video on that and some more info, leave a comment, let me know, and I'll try to get that made for you. What we do need to talk about though right now is what represents shrinking in the pattern, right? So when we put the pattern on here and we pull it down, you see it wants to ruffle up in this area. Those ruffles represent the area that needs to be shrunk. So what I did is I opened up the pattern, and so you guys can see it, I traced the shrink marks with Sharpie. Now, one thing that you have to notice, because you got to keep this in mind when you're shrinking on the machine, is the shape of the shrinks. They're actually triangles, right? Because to make a radius, we need more material shrunk at the bottom than at the top, okay? Keep that in mind. We're going to have to shrink more material at the bottom of this radius than at the top of the radius. So that's going to have to dictate the approach that we use with the machine when we do our shrinking. Because if we just keep shrinking the entire length of the tucks here on the pattern, we're just basically going to make a flat flange. There's going to be no radius to that. Okay? So we're shrinking more at the bottom than at the top. So the way that we're going to go about that, just grab my handy marker here. As you see, I've transferred the pattern, and these are the depth of our shrinks, of our longest shrinks, right? So we're going to do our first round. It's going to look like just like this. We're going to run into the machine all the way to the top of these triangles. Now our next round, we're going to go about 3/4 of the way. Just like that. Then, you guessed it, we're going to do another round We're going to go lower. Okay? And we're going to run along the bottom. And that's going to be basically our one round of shrinking. So we go long, middle, short. Okay? And we're going to stagger our shrinks like that. That way, if you think about it, this top area in the round of shrinking is going to be shrunk once. This 3/4 area is going to be shrunk twice, right? Because we've already gone this deep. Now we're going 3/4 of the way. The next one is going to be shrunk 3 times. All right? And I'll probably actually do another round right along the edge to tighten up the edge. You'll see when I jump on the hammer and start working. Okay? Now, this panel needs a lot of shrinking. This is a lot of material to account for. You can see how much extra is there. All right? So we're not going to get all of that shrunk in one go. So what we're going to do to approach this panel is we're going to do our shrinking. And we're going to get it most of the way there with shrinking. And then we'll hop over to the radius dies and we'll do some stretching along the highlight line of the panel. And that's going to be in a different video. And we're going to use the combination of the shrinking and the stretching to get this panel to fit the buck right where we need it. All right, so now let's go jump on the machine, start moving some metal. I've got the thumbnail dies in the machine ready to go. Now, when I run steel, I like to lubricate the panel a little bit. What I have here is a mix. It's half automatic transmission fluid and half mineral spirits. Just a real light coat, literally just about spray on each side. And then I take a paper towel and just kind of spread it out and almost wipe it off. I just want a real thin coat. All this does is help the panel slide across the dies a little bit easier. And that's it. That's ready to go. Also, when using the machine, I wear ear protection and gloves. You do you. That's what I do. The technique when running thumbnail dies is we're going to be feeding straight in and then straight out, okay? On the way in, we're going to keep the panel pretty much level and square in all directions, this way and this way. Feed it in, we're going to create that tuck. And then on the way out, we're going to give it very little bit of downward angle on the way out, okay? Because we're going to be showing the material which way to go as it shrinks. It's going to be shrinking down and we're going to shrinking in and we're going to want it to go down. So we're going to give it just a little bit of a downhill tilt. On these really deep shrinks, I find it a little bit better to not give it so much of a downhill on the way out. But then as we get closer to the edge, you'll see I'll give the panel a little bit more of an angle on the way out, okay? But nice easy in and then straight out, let the machine do the work, all right? You're gonna have to play with the machine a little bit and get the timing right. So your speed for pushing in and then your speed for coming back out, okay? Another thing to keep in mind is if the panel wants to get a little jumpy like this, it's because you have the panel lean one way or the other, and I'm known for doing this. I haven't actually been running a power hammer for that long. So if you get it jumpy, just stop, let off, get yourself back level and square, and finish out the shrink whichever way you're going. Not a big deal, okay? So let's fire this thing up and get going. Okay, that's where we're at after the first round. You can see that corner dropping down. Pretty good. All right, that's, I don't know, maybe a minute, a couple minutes of runtime, not even. I'll have to look at the video. So that's our first round. So we're going to do the same thing again. We're going to come all the way in and then bring it down. All right, so there's round two. You can see how much that corner dropped. So now what I'm going to do actually is I'm going to switch over to a radius die and smooth this out real quick, and now give us a better look at how much progress we've made shrinking. And we're also, I'll put a little bit of form in the panel. Basically just start bending the panel to the shape that it needs to go into on the buck, and that'll give us a real good indicator of how much work we've done in this few minutes of shrinking on the hammer. So here we are. You know, we still have a lot of material to move here. Like I said, this panel needs a lot of shrinking. But you can see in that first round already, we brought down the panel quite a bit in this corner. So, got the thumbnail dies back in, and let's just get back into it. right, so as you can see, we've moved a lot of material. There's a lot of shrinking. That corner is way down now. So let's take it over the buck and see how it's looking. Just giving the panel a quick wipe down here. It's some acetone, get some of that lubrication off we put on for running in the hammer. Now let's throw it on the buck and see how we did. Alright, now this panel still has a long way to go. But as you can see, we shrunk a lot of material here. This is a big corner that came out and we brought it all the way down. If you remember, like I said, I'm going to do this panel partially by shrinking and then a little bit of stretching up here along the highlight line. Once we get this area stretched out a bit, this panel is really going to sit down onto the buck. But we're off to a great start with just the shrinking we did, getting this bulk of material brought way down around the corner. So the next step now is to planche this out some more. I already ran down the radius dies. That's a flat upper die and a radius lower die to smooth it out quite a bit. So now the next step to planching and get the surface quality better is you can either jump on a planching hammer, which I use sometimes, but I think I'm going to use the wheel because I prefer using an English wheel whenever I can. So I'm going to run this in the wheel. If you didn't have access to one of those, you could also planche this out further by hand, like a slapper and dolly, something like that. But I'm going to do it on the wheel. So let's wheel this up a bit and see how it looks when it's done. As you can see, a few minutes of wheeling, taking out almost all the marks left behind from the thumbnail dies. A few more minutes of wheeling, and you can get all those marks out and get that flawless looking panel. Now that last stage was even necessary. The panel where it was straight off the hammer could have been painted. It was more than adequate. Primer coat would have taken care of any of the marks from the thumbnail, but this just gives it that extra level of quality. So I'm going to stop here at this level, at this stage in the video, because on the next video we'll pick up with stretching along this highlight line using the various radius dies, and we'll really get this panel and start sitting down on the buck. Now, one thing I would like you to keep in mind when you're watching this video and the following videos is this hammer is not a Yoder, it's not a big pettingale, it doesn't weigh 12,000 pounds or whatever those big hammers weigh, and it doesn't cost $30,000 or more like the other big hammers on the market. This is a hammer that weighs a few hundred pounds and costs under $4,000 fully assembled, shipped to your door. So, or you could also buy the build it yourself kit and save yourself even more money. So for the size and its price, that's a killer deal. Is it moving metal like a giant Yoder? No, of course not. The laws of physics say it's not going to happen. But, I mean, those are amazing results for a machine of its size and at its price point. Okay, it is a workhorse of a little machine. So if you are interested in getting one yourself, when you go over to Sosa Metalworks, use the promo code CATSKILLS, CATSKILLS, at checkout. I'll put it down below so you don't forget it, and that'll save you some extra money. So until the next video, I'll see you then. Don't forget, click like, subscribe, comment on this video. It feels terrible and lame saying that, but it really does help get other people to get some eyes on the video, and it helps grow the channel, so I appreciate that. And I'll catch you on the next one.